In today's market, multiple offers are the norm, and not just a couple multiple offers, but a dozen or more in many circumstances. Navigating those multiple offer situations can be real tricky, but we're going to tell you how to do it ethically, fairly, and honestly today on Talking Real.
Multiple offers? Let's find out how to handle them.
Welcome back to Talking Real, brought to you by the Oklahoma Association of Realtors. This is episode 170 of Talking Real, and we're so glad to have you back with us. Where, Nabil, this week, man, this is something that's been going on like crazy for the last year with this insane market that we've had. It's amazing we haven't talked about it yet, is multiple offers. We're going to talk about presenting and negotiating multiple offers, and man, there's a lot to talk about here, really from two perspectives. And so you got to talk about this, not just, we're going to start with talking about it from the seller's perspective, right? So if you're the listing broker, we're going to talk today about presenting and negotiating multiple offers. One, to make sure you're complying with the code of ethics, but also just to make sure that, kind of aware of the process that you need to be having going through that. And then we're going to have another part of this because there's enough to talk about there that we got to do this in two parts. We'll talk about presenting and negotiating offers, multiple offer situations on behalf of the buyer, because it's a whole different animal. It's a different thing.
Right. It is. And I'm kind of excited to, throw my patented curveballs at Jeff.
Nabil's got all kinds of questions that, maybe I've never thought about, maybe you've never thought about, but man, it's just a crazy time right now. And every transaction has multiple offers, right? That just seems to be the time that we're in right now. Super low inventory, very aggressive market in terms of a lot of buyers coming through, a lot of properties. Multiple offers. I mean, it's not unusual. This sounds crazy to say that you could have a 12, 18, 20 offers on a property. That just seems unreal, but like we keep hearing that kind of story.
And that would have been like a once in a blue moon situation, but now that situation is reversed, where if you're disappointed when you only get one or two offers, and you're like, that did not see that coming.
Yeah, exactly. So, we wanted to talk about just how you deal with multiple offers. And today, like we said, we're talking about it if you're the listing broker, because there's a lot of different issues that are here. And, I hear a lot of complaints on the legal line. We see complaints coming through in professional standards, ethics complaints being filed. And I think a lot of that could be headed off by just a discussion about how to handle multiple offers to make sure that things are being done correctly. And in some cases, there's not necessarily, I think this is the difficult part with it. There's not just one way to handle multiple offer situations if you're the listing broker. There's a lot of different things that could be done. And so it's a real challenge for people when different people do things differently. Different sellers may want to do things differently. And so there's no one established, like, this is the way you have to do multiple offers if you're going to receive multiple offers.
Right. Because one, you mentioned different sellers might do something differently because they have different preferences, and ultimately you are doing what the seller wants to be done, right? But then on the other side, and we're going to talk about buyers later, but the people on the other side of the table might be doing something completely different from the next person as well. So you could be, one, your seller is unique, but then on the other side, you're dealing with 5 or 10 people that are also unique.
Right.
And that's a lot to manage.
Absolutely. And I think the underpinning here is that if you're going to have a multiple offer situation, and you've got to be prepared for it now, there's a lot of things you need to do. But one of the things that you want to make sure you understand is that, why is this important? What is the why for why we're even talking about this? And it starts with the code of ethics, because all realtors are bound by the code of ethics. And so you need to make sure you're doing this in a way that does remain ethical, because we don't want to see these kinds of scenarios coming before our professional standards. But also on top of that is handling things in a way that's consistent with state law, right? You want to make sure you're following the real estate commission laws and guidelines. And now, fortunately for us, in terms of multiple offers, we can pretty much just rely on the code of ethics because I think it's consistent with state law as well. But we start with Article 1 of the Code of Ethics. And to kind of refresh everybody's memory on what that talks about is that all realtors pledge themselves to protect and promote the interests of their clients, right? So we got to start with the idea that if I'm a listing broker and I've got multiple offers coming in, I need to think about how this is going to be handled in a way that protects and promotes the interest of my clients.
What's best for my clients.
Right. Seems straightforward, but once we get into this, not quite as much as you might think. And then the second part of Article 1 is that does not relieve realtors of their obligation to treat all parties honestly. So the other component is that you have to make sure that all parties are being treated honestly, which is, seems straightforward as well, that you can't lie to people. But again, it can be difficult. It can be very difficult.
Right. Because if your client is the seller, there's things about treating them ethically, right? But then you're like, well, I'm trying to get the best offer for my client, so maybe I could do X, Y, and Z, but don't do anything shady.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what further complicates this, particularly in the situations we have now, is within Standard of Practice 1-6. This is just interpretive language of Article 1. It also says that realtors shall submit offers and counteroffers objectively and as quickly as possible. So that's a challenge as well, because you have to make sure you're on the same page with your seller. And again, that you're also on the same page as the buyers, and you're informing them if there's going to be a certain schedule for when offers are going to be submitted and the time period for accepting those, right? This all goes into protecting the client's interests as well as treating everybody honestly.
Yeah. And there could be a scenario where you could be representing a buyer in the mix and the seller.
Yeah. I think that is extraordinarily difficult. We'll probably end with that because that's a tricky scenario, and I've heard of some different people trying to handle those in different ways, because this is more than just, well, we've got 2 offers and I just happen to have a buyer. No, we've got a lot of different scenarios going on here with multiple offers. And if you've got both the buyer and the seller in that, you're going to have a lot of people that could potentially be upset with you. So we're going to cover that.
Whose interest reigns supreme?
Right. Exactly.
So that's the question of the day.
Absolutely. So I think the place to start with this here is it begins with having a conversation with your seller, your client, at the time you enter into that listing agreement. Because if you're not having a conversation up front right now, and I'm assuming everybody is to some degree, having a conversation of there's a pretty decent chance we could get multiple offers. And especially if you're in like a particular part of the metro area within a particular price range, that you could list that property and sell it within an hour, right? That's crazy like that, but you may be holding it open for a weekend, something along those lines. But you need to have a very thorough discussion with your seller up front about those expectations and how that's going to be managed, because you need to explain to them up front before the offers even come in how they want to handle multiple offers. How do they want to negotiate those so that there is no question in the flurry of everything going on? You've already covered this with the seller. There's already a plan. It's already in place, and you know what the expectations are, and your seller knows what the expectations are. And then you can inform the other parties what the expectations are as well.
That this is what we're doing today.
Right.
And your primary role as their realtor is to guide them. So those different scenarios, you're going to talk about pros, cons, be like, hey, if we leave this open for the week, we might get more offers as opposed to leave it open for an hour, right? If you want to renegotiate all the contracts, you might get a higher offer, but then chances are, whatever could happen. So you want to go through some of those scenarios to help them make their decision on how they're going to handle all the contracts coming in.
Right. Because in today's market, and it may be different than next year, but at least right now, you may say, well, if we get multiple offers, one of the things we can do is we can respond back to everybody and say, you've got until Sunday at noon to submit your highest and best offer. Now, maybe that's a good idea. Maybe in some markets it is. Maybe today it's not, because everybody kind of understands that they're going to come in with their highest and best offer, right? So that's one option that you may be having with somebody is, we'll respond to everybody that comes in asking for that highest and best. But again, maybe that's not the right thing to do today. You can also explain that there are scenarios where we'll get 10 offers in, but we're just going to choose one and we're going to negotiate that one offer. And that's what we're going to do. And we're going to set the others aside. And if we can negotiate this one offer, well, great. That's the one that we'll negotiate. Maybe we'll counter offer and negotiate that.
Right.
But you also need to explain in that kind of scenario that these other offers may lapse, right? Because there's a termination date. And so if they've got another offer that they like, you've got to pay close attention to when those offers lapse and are no longer able to be accepted, because that's sort of the risk of the negotiation period. Mm-hmm. You may also say, we're confident we're going to get a large number of offers. So if we get 10 offers, at that point, we're just going to accept the best offer. We're not even going to negotiate, because we don't want to risk losing the second best offer if for some reason this falls. I mean, there's any number of scenarios.
Right. And maybe they're on a tight timeline and they have to do this, whatever reason. That's why every situation is unique.
Absolutely. And so that's where you need to make sure you are being very upfront with your seller about all these possible scenarios that you may be encountering. And so that, again, once you've determined that we're going to get, list this property, get the offers in, and then we'll accept the best one. Mm-hmm. Other things that we see right now are you need to have this conversation about when are we going to actually make it active, and when are we going to set a deadline for accepting offers? This is something that we've seen a lot, right? Where it goes active on Thursday or Friday. We're going to open all offers or submit all offers on Sunday at noon. You've got your seller that's signed off on that, and then the seller is going to take the best offer. That's very different than what we've traditionally done a year ago, where you just list the property and it's open until an offer comes in that the seller wants to take.
Right.
So we've got this compressed timeline for offers. And so you need to have that conversation about what the process is, because again, it's the seller's decision. So you as the listing broker cannot say, I'm going to hold offers that come in on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday until Sunday at 5 p.m. You can't make that decision. That has to be the seller's.
But you can guide your sellers into making that decision.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that as long as you're being objective, right? You're explaining the good business reasons for doing it. You're explaining the pros and cons of why. I mean, because you're the expert. They want you to be that expert. So if you're explaining to them that, look, here's a good reason that why we want to go this way on this particular property, maybe a little bit different than others, but this is what we think will give you the best opportunity to get the best possible price.
Right.
But you've got to explain the pros, the cons, why you're doing it. And again, it has to be their decision, because if they say, no, I don't want to do that. Whenever an offer comes in, I want you to bring it to me immediately, right? That may be what they say.
Right.
And if that's the case, well, then you better do what they say. You can't hold those offers, because that will ultimately be both a violation of the Code of Ethics and a violation of OREC's licensing law. And so you want to avoid that at all costs. That's why you got to be upfront and talk about these issues immediately when you're getting into the listing of a property, so that your seller knows what the deal is. Get it in writing from them if that's what they want to do, that they've agreed and signed off on it. That's going to help protect you. And again, it's going to help you to make sure that you communicate that to all the buyers.
Yeah.
I want to make another point on this as well, because I've seen some scenarios where some ethics violations have been contemplated and alleged, where you have a listing broker who has put in the MLS that the deadline for submitting offers is Sunday at noon. But then somebody comes in Sunday morning, requests a showing or submits an offer, and they say, well, an offer's already been accepted. We're already under contract. Okay. This is a scenario that I really want everybody to avoid. And again, this goes back to why you're having a conversation with your seller up front and getting them in writing to agree to a certain way to handle it. Because people have filed ethics complaints saying that, one, you were apparently not submitting offers objectively because you were submitting them before the deadline. So why did you do that? You also weren't treating all parties honestly, because you told us that we had until Sunday at noon to submit an offer, but it was already under contract before that deadline. Mm-hmm. That you also weren't protecting and promoting the interests of your client, because you set a deadline that would have brought in more offers that maybe would have been better offer, but you, for some reason, ushered them into signing a contract before that deadline. So these are some tricky things that you have to figure out how you're going to deal with because it will absolutely potentially create some problems, particularly if you're in a situation where that buyer that was accepted early is your client, right? So this brings us to that scenario of if you're the listing broker on a property today that's going to get 20 offers on it, what are the risks and rewards of having both ends of that transaction?
So before we jump into that closing thought, what if your seller just had a change of heart? What if they said, hey, let's set the deadline for 5 p.m. on Sunday. That is fantastic. Send me all the offers as they come in, just so we're not waiting at the end, which is all reasonable asks, right? But then there's an offer comes in and they see it and they're like, you know what, we're happy with this. We're done. Like, I don't even want to wait the next 4 days for Sunday. I want to get this done now. How would you could advise them, be like, hey, look, we said we're going to keep it open on Sunday. This offer's not going anywhere. It'll be fine. But if they're insistent, what do you do? Yeah,
so in those circumstances, you do have to follow the directions of your client, right? I mean, they get to make the ultimate decision. So you can't tell them, no, you can't accept it. But in those circumstances where the game has changed, right, and you've put that out there that we're going to hold all offers until, Sunday at noon.
Right.
The situation there then is that you need to make sure that that is documented. You got to make sure that that is clear so that if somebody does file an ethics complaint, you can say, look, it was the seller's decision. Originally, we talked about keeping it open to Sunday. An offer came in. They were aware of it. They wanted to just accept it and be done with it. Like, it was their decision.
And here's all the documentation.
Here's the documentation to support that. In that circumstance, you're going to be fine. Because again, your ultimate obligation is your client's interest. They made the decision. You can't control that, right? So have those conversations up front, set the guidelines, the boundaries, the plan. And then if it changes along the way, make sure that that is fully documented so that you're covering your interests as well. So nobody alleges that you've done something the wrong way.
Right. So now back to that. You're representing both sides.
Yeah. So I've heard a lot of people talk about in today's market that many are unwilling to even entertain the idea of having both the seller and the buyer on a property that's going to have a lot of different offers on it, because they know that if their buyer gets the property, that every other person that submitted an offer is going to assume that there was some wrongdoing.
There's something suspect happening there, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Now,
but even if it was the best offer,
sure, and that's the thing is you don't have to do that, right? But some people have determined, you know what, it's not worth it. It's not worth the headache for what may happen. I'm just going to refer them to somebody else, and maybe that's somebody within their own firm, right? There's ways to deal with that, and it may be somebody in a completely different firm to say, listen, I'm going to recommend you go work with this person. Just because I'm representing the buyer and or the seller, and so there's a lot of different scenarios here. Or again, somebody else within the firm or their broker will handle it, something along those lines where they're not personally handling it, just as a way to kind of mitigate that risk. Now, that may be the best deal for the seller because, a lot of times people will have variable rate commissions, so that if it is an in-house transaction, the seller is going to pay less commission in total than they would if that's, another brokerage that brings the buyer. And so in those circumstances, it makes sense why it may be a better deal for, the seller. But again, you got to make sure that you're keeping things documented. You've got a clear process and procedure in place. Your broker's involved if you're, in a larger firm and you've got a broker. Because the other strategy that I've seen people do is that if it's an in-house transaction, then, or the possibility, any offers that are in-house, they're going to seal those offers and they're going to deliver them to the broker. And then the broker will be the one who presents all the offers to the seller. They will unseal them all at the same time. And that way there's no
bias.
Right. And again, in that circumstance, you've got the seller on board with, on this day at this time, we're going to sit down with all the offers, go through them, give you the net sheet on all of them and tell you why, or let you determine which one you think is the best offer. Right. But the last thing you want is some allegation that you've only been protecting and promoting your interests, not the interests of the client. Because if it's an in-house transaction, Somebody else is going to say, well, I brought a buyer who offered $10,000 over asking price, whatever, right? It's just hypothetical. How could it possibly be like, I can't believe that it's a better deal for them. They're going to think that something inappropriate happened. Right. They're just going to assume that.
Because they don't know all the offers. They don't know what went down. It's going to happen.
Right. And I wish that wasn't the case, but I hear it every week. And so, be sure you're handling that in the right way. Have a plan for what's going to happen if it is an in-house transaction, how that's going to be dealt with internally. Get your broker involved. And again, make sure that you're protecting protect yourself as well as protecting and promoting the interests of your client. Again, that's just risk management. Don't get yourself into a situation that'll get you sued, that'll give you an ethics violation or something along those lines. That's what you want to avoid. So, be cautious about that. Pay attention to kind of what your process is. Get the broker involved because that's a tricky situation that's just going to lead to people being upset. And so you got to kind of consider how that's going to be handled. And you want to just do a little bit of risk management on that front.
Right. Now, that's not necessarily saying that you can't do it, right?
Absolutely.
It's a risk reward scenario.
Yep.
And you just kind of have to decide what's good and comfortable for you to for the situation for you to be in.
Absolutely. What's best for your client, what's going to protect your business interests as well so that you're not, putting unneeded risk of litigation or licensing violations, those kinds of things. So absolutely some caution is warranted. And again, this goes back to like the whole situation is there's no one way to do this. There are multiple possible correct ways to do it. It needs to be done objectively. It needs to be done ethically, honestly. And these are all things that are mandated. I want to point everybody to, if you go on to nar.realtor, you can search for the Code of Ethics and Arbitration Manual. It's long. I mean, it's like 250 pages that tells how we handle.
That is 250 pages?
Yeah.
Man.
250 pages of.
We have it sitting right in front of us.
Exactly. Of, how ethics and arbitration proceedings are handled. But in this respect, I want to point you to Appendix 9 to Part 4. It's on page 71 of this manual if you look up the PDF, and it's specifically titled Presenting and Negotiating Multiple Offers. It's about a page and a half that sort of outlines some of the things that we've talked about here today and what we'll talk about on the next episode when we talk about navigating multiple offers from the buyer's perspective, if you're a buyer's broker, and kind of some thoughts on that process as well to make sure that you're doing the best for your client you possibly can. Mm-hmm. But this is really important that this is handled correctly. This is the kind of thing that will give everybody a good impression of the real estate industry and realtors and how we do our job out there. So be very careful about it. And again, I think one of the best things you can do is remember that sort of the underpinning of the Code of Ethics goes back to the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So communicate with people. There's no problem with keeping everybody in the loop on the status of their offers. So when somebody, I know you're going to get a lot of them, do everything you can to communicate with everybody, right? Let them know you received the offer. Let them know when it's going to be presented. Once it's presented, if they didn't get it, let them know. Tell them, even if, just however you handle that, make sure you're communicating with people, keep them in the loop, go the extra mile, be helpful to people. And that, again, how would you want to be treated in that scenario? And if you do that, that's really going to help mitigate a lot of the risk and a lot of the problems. So keep that in mind as you're navigating these very challenging, but good scenarios of having all these wonderful offers that are getting your clients lots and lots of extra money on their properties. That's great.
Right. It's a tricky scenario, but it's a good one, but it's also something to be cognizant of. Like there's a lot happening here.
Absolutely.
I'm really excited about next week when we continue this topic and talk from the other side of the table where you are now going to be representing a buyer. And I'll tell you why I'm so excited is because we're going to talk about some creative offers, which we didn't get to touch upon as, obviously the seller agent, but we're going to talk about how some creative offers can throw you for a loop for a second. Threw Jeff for a loop.
Yep, absolutely. I may not have answers for everything, but I look forward to the challenge of trying to address those questions and some interesting ideas.
He's going to do some research.
Absolutely. So thanks again for joining us. We hope this was helpful. Just going to let you guys know, you may see a little bit of a tweak in our format. We're going to be trying to make sure that these episodes are the right length for you guys that you want, so they give you the information you need right up front as quick as we can, but keep you engaged. And so let us know what you think. If you have a thought on how best to format our podcast, or any ideas that you think we should cover, or any questions you may have, or thoughts on how you handle these scenarios, send us an email to podcast@OKRealtors.com.
And if you haven't done so yet, hit that subscribe button so you know when this next episode is out, especially part 2 with some creative buying scenarios. And share this podcast with a fellow realtor that has been through a multiple offer situation or will likely go through one. So
absolutely. So until next time, we'll see you next Tuesday on Talking Real.